Welcome to Navigating Receiverships, a podcast from the Commercial Receivers Association, focused on building a better understanding of what brings companies into receivership, what happens in receivership, what makes them unique, some alternatives to receiverships, and ultimately, what happens to the business as the receivership is closed out. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Morcheski, CRA board member and CEO of Nimble Strategies. Here today with Geoff Berman, former president of ABI, and obviously someone that a lot of our listeners have worked with and gotten to know over these years. Geoff, thanks so much for being here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background for maybe those that aren't aware of who you are and all the experience you have?
Sure. Thanks, Eric, for the invitation, and happy to do it. The abridged version, because I could probably take up way too much time. I started dealing with insolvent businesses in 1977, believe it or not, when I was a banker, and met the assignment for the benefit of creditor worlds when a debtor walked in and put the keys on the table and said, "Here, bank, take them." And the bank lawyer said, "No, we don't want them," and pointed at somebody like you and said, "Make an assignment for the benefit of creditors." And went, "Huh? What's that?" And I've been dealing with them pretty much nonstop up until the end of 2022, when I retired after 26 years with development specialists. I keep my hand in it by staying on top of things. I'm currently working on the latest edition of the ABI book, is General Assignments for the Benefit of Creditors, the ABCs of ABCs, with some help from Rob Saunders of the Pachulski Stang firm. As you mentioned, I was president of the ABI, was vice president of publications, was an editor of the ABI Journal. I've edited a number of their publications. Much of what I've done over the 45 plus years has been to stay attuned to developments in bankruptcy. And I guess the other part of the background is the year I was president, ABI formed its commission to study the reform of Chapter 11. So I was ex officio on that and served as one of the overseers of one of the 13 committees that came out of that. And I feel like after almost 50 years, I've tried to leave the practice in a little bit better shape than I found it.
I noticed you left off that we've gotten to know each other from being two of the non-attorneys on the Uniform Law Commission's assignment for the benefit of creditors committee. So I don't know if that was intentional, if you didn't want to associate with me in that way.
No, I should have, but
You do
I
have
do have. I will say though, Eric, I do have a law degree. I don't have the license to practice, but I'm a non-practicing lawyer. But yeah, I am involved. When that committee was formed, Dale Hager, who's now passed on, reached out to me and a number of others and you to be observers. That committee has now formed a drafting committee to draft the Model Act. A first reading has been done to the full Uniform Law Commission, and the goal is to have it read next July and approved to then go out to the states. Not to leave it as an oversight, but yeah, you and I and a number of other people that, again, I could take way too long to mention.
It's a good experienced group that is providing those insights and hopefully eventually, it's sometimes painfully so, slowly getting us towards where we want to go with it.
You'll get there. I think you are well along the ways of having Commercial Receivers Association become a national player in receiverships.
Yeah, we've got a good group of people that are practicing daily, but a lot of our members are very active across a lot of states now. So it's been a good thing. And kind of uniquely today, we're actually going to talk through ABCs, even though this is a receivership podcast, which, ABCs are maybe the brother or sister of of receiverships, and depending on how you look at it. And so, uniquely here, we're actually going to talk about two ABCs. So one in court within Delaware, one that's coming from an out of court perspective. But can you kind of set up both of these cases that you worked on, and give people a little bit of background of what was happening with the companies and why they entered into this ABC process?
Sure. Well, let's start with the out of court case. And this case started in 2000. And whenever a principal or a lawyer who was not experienced with assignments would say, well, how long is this going to take? What's the average length of a case? Well, what's the average length of your receiverships? You don't know until you get to the facts. Well, this particular one was up in Maine, and it took 6 years to resolve. And Maine is a common law state, so there's no court supervision, the same as in Delaware or Florida or Minnesota now. The company up in Maine was run by a group of Thai nationals, and they were developing a line of chickens with plumper white meat breasts and had borrowed $30+ million from 4 banks and ran into financial trouble and made an assignment. And in Maine, you have to make it to an individual, and the individual was Bill Brandt. Individually as the assignee, but I did all the work. We had to deal with all the equipment and the simple things, go liquidate the things. One of the things, however, was a $2 million purchase credit with Tyson Foods so that they could buy breeding stock. Well, we put that up for sale, and a group wanted to be a stalking horse bidder, same concept as you would in a bankruptcy. And my counsel was Bob Keach, Robert J. Keach, another past president of ABI. He's with the Bernstein, Shore, Sawyer, and Nelson firm in Portland, Maine. And he and I would get these I've got a draft asset purchase agreement, and every time we turned around, the stalking horse bidder kept saying the bidder want final decision as to when the bidding is over. Then we would cross it out and say no, then send it back to them, and they'd put it back in, and we'd say no, and they'd put it back in, and we say no. And this went on about a half dozen times. So they finally end up signing off, and the assignee gets the final say. We have the sale. Somebody bids twice what their stalking horse bid was. We give them multiple chances to overbid. They don't. We close the sale, get a little over $1 million wired in the next day. And then that bidder sued us for breach of contract and alleged that they had the final say. Back to the asset purchase agreements where we went, no. That dragged on for a long time, and we ended up trial in Chicago, and on a snowy day goes to a jury, and the jury's out 20 minutes and comes back and says, no breach of contract. The other fun thing in that was the banks had a handshake agreement, and these are for the most part all foreign banks, not to take the parent on a guarantee, just to take the operating entity. And of course, one of the banks did this and took a guarantee. They cross guaranteed it. Well, that created all sorts of havoc. Then we ended up in a mediation with that bank, and we finally get it resolved, and the lawyer for the bank says, by the way, would the assignment estate pay for my fees? Well, maybe we'd be happy to look at it. And his fees alone were 3 times what Mr. Keach's fees and my fees were for the same work. We politely said, no, thanks. So that process took 6 years. Creditors got, if memory serves me correct, was, we're now going back 15+ years. I think they got 25 or 30 cents on the dollar, which for assignment cases is not bad. A lot of them in today's world don't pay well because of the status of lending and lenders being aggressive and taking all of the assets. So that's an example of the common law. I mean, names like Uncle Milton Toys, but common law, California, Illinois, there's a lot that you can do. And as the assets basis have changed with .com and intellectual property, the sale processes are still the same. You still go out and find a bidder. You try and have a public process. If the debtor has done it in advance, then maybe you don't need it. You can just immediately sell. I'll give you a quick story about that. Secured creditors owed $40 million. Insider says, I want to buy. I'll pay you 10. But they hadn't marketed the assets. They hire an investment banker. 60 days later, they get an outsider and says, Eric, I'll pay you 6. 2 days before the deal is to close, that guy says, change my mind. I'm walking. Insider walks up and says, I'll pay 5. The bank group said, I'll take the 5. Took the assignment, immediately sold. You can do that if the facts will support it. You go to Delaware. Delaware statutes go back to the 1800s. They got revised, I want to say, the 1960s, but it's a very thin statute. In 2004, a lawyer at Preston Gates and Ellis, who's now a bankruptcy judge, wrote an assignment statute that turned assignments into receiverships and got it passed, because that's what it took to get the Washington Software Alliance, i.e. Microsoft and the beginnings of Amazon, to sign off. About 10 years later, Minnesota took that and turned their assignment statute into a receivership, meaning you can make the assignment, but the assignee immediately has to open a receivership action, get named the receiver. And all the rules that you're used to as a receiver come into play. Well, this particular story out of Delaware was a second-time loser, if you will. A Chapter 18 would be the concept. They did a Chapter 11, came out, assumed all of the trade debt, and then failed. Company was named Coldwater Creek Women's Fashions. They started as a catalog company out of Sandpoint, Idaho, north of Coeur d'Alene, and turned it into a large brick and mortar shop. Well, of course, COVID destroyed brick and mortar, as we know, and they made an assignment for the benefit of creditors. Having closed all of the brick and mortar stores, leaving leases in disarray, leaving stores in disarray, leaving unsecured creditors angrier than you can imagine, and ready to put the case into a bankruptcy, because they had been promised out of the first bankruptcy that all their debt would be assumed, and didn't expect that the company would fail 18 to 24 months later, ignoring COVID, of course, the impact there. In Delaware, you have court oversight in the courts of chancery. It's primarily on an ex parte basis. There's not a lot of hearings, if you will. You file your petition. You do what you want to do. You want to get a motion to sell the assets. You tell the court what you've done. You give notice to the creditors. You get an order. And because it's Delaware and it's a court and it's a respected court, creditors generally like it, even though it's an assignment, because it's bankruptcy light, if you will. Well, we had a bunch of very unhappy creditors, some of whom wanted to put the case into a bankruptcy, and some of whom the first question they asked their lawyers, well, who's the assignee? And when it was found out that development specialist, DSI, and I were running the case, they backed off, sold all the assets, sold all the inventory, sold all the copyrights. And of course, the copyright are all the pictures that go into their catalogs. They're all owned by Coldwater Creek. We had to get an appraisal of the intellectual property at, if memory serves me correct, $60,000 cost, to satisfy the court that we were getting fair value. And at the end of a year and a half, creditors got 8 cents on the dollar. Not a lot, but it was a lot better than it would have been if it had been a straight Chapter 7. So those are 2 examples.
So you've done a lot of cases in and out of both situations, right? You've worked in court ABCs, you've worked out of court ABCs. What are some things that people should take away about the differences between the two?
Well, let me suggest that the differences are process only and not what you do. You're a fiduciary. And as you and I have listened into the long discussions at the Uniform Law Commission committee in drafting, are they a trustee? Are they a fiduciary? I'm on record for years, decades. They're a fiduciary. They hold assets in trust for the benefit of creditors. How can you not have a fiduciary duty to the people who are the beneficiaries? I don't care whether you're the receiver or you're the receiver in a receivership. You have a duty to marshal, inventory, and liquidate the assets in the most commercially reasonable manner you can. The difference, you have a court in Minnesota, you have a court in Delaware. You need to go in and tell the court what you're doing. And in courts where the oversight is much greater, Minnesota being the best example, You're going to go in on everything on motion just like you would in a normal receivership. I'm not going to, the order says I can do this. This is what I want to do. Well, in Delaware, you don't have the order says this because the court takes whoever the assignee is who's making the petition. What's changed even since Coldwater Creek in Delaware are similar to bankruptcy first day motions. We, the court, want to know all the facts. This is not going to be hidden behind a screen. Who's the secured creditor? How many times have you done cases for the secured creditor? How many times have you worked with that law firm? What's the creditor body going to look like? You have 30 days from the date of the assignment to get the inventory on file. You better get the inventory on file. Don't hire your appraisers until the court approves them. How many cases have those auctioneers appraisers done? Do they have a conflict? This is all recent in the last 3 or 4 years in Delaware. And the reason is assignees were playing fast and loose. And like anything else, you get a bad receiver who ignores the court order. You, as the person coming in the next case, are going to get yelled at for what the prior party did, even though it's not your case. But the process is the same. Marshal the assets, liquidate them in a reasonable manner. And remember, the Uniform Commercial Code says that a reasonable manner is defined under 9627C4, which doesn't say a lot, but it pretty much gives you a whole lot of what and how to say what you want to say, do what you want to do, as long as it's reasonable. All right. Well, back to my example, and didn't have the assets marketed. Go market the assets. Don't hide it. I mean, here's an example. Would you, as a receiver, put up for sale assets and require the potential buyers to sign an NDA without knowing who the assignor / debtor was?
No, I mean, we don't use an NDA approach often. I mean, we might if we were, to a specific asset, if there was proprietary information in there, but it wouldn't be a surprise as to who the debtor was by any means.
Well, you want to have some fun and get scared? I saw one of those years ago. And where did the assets get sold to? The undisclosed insider. There were a lot of unhappy people there. The process is still market the assets if they haven't been marketed. If they've been marketed sufficiently, and that's the best deal that's out there, great. In the Coldwater Creek, we had a party come forward, wanted to be a buyer. We held an auction after a couple of weeks because the assets could survive the couple of weeks. If you have an ongoing business, and you know what the phrase an e-tailer is, right? Well, you do that, they go dark. Now what happens? And so in one case in Delaware, did the assignment and told the court we had a transition services agreement with the likely buyer, including that buyer assuming all of the costs of running the business in the period to market the assets. At the end of a couple of weeks, nobody else had come forward. They were the buyer, and it was all smooth, and the secured creditor approved it. But the facts dictate, and I'll suggest to you, I don't care whether you're in Delaware, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Florida, the process is the same. Mm-hmm. Take possession, know what you're taking possession of, liquidate them in a reasonable manner, and distribute the proceeds. The rest is all know the law under which you are doing the work. And maybe if I can segue here for a minute, the know your law thing is really important, I think, because so much of what's going on is people take the assignment, don't understand it, don't hire competent counsel, and those just make it really hard for everybody else. And that's where you're going to get courts to make an effort to stay so far away from those people. They're going to make it hard. Mm-hmm. They want transparency. They want creditors to know. And that's, I think, really the issue here. It really is that party that abuses the process that makes it harder for everybody else. The caution in all of this is be careful what you want to do. Just know the law. If you know the law and have good counsel, you can do what you need to do in an assignment. You can even keep an assignment out of bankruptcy if an involuntary is filed within the first 120 days. That brings me back maybe full circle, Eric, to just because you're in a state court or you're doing a common law assignment doesn't mean bankruptcy law and practice doesn't cross over and give you good guidance as to what to do.
So normally I kind of try to close out these conversations with, is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave people with?
If you don't mind my being a little repetitive.
Yep.
Know the law of the state you're doing your work in.
Mm-hmm.
Hire good counsel. If you're new at it, and everybody seems to be coming up with someone new every day. I ran into somebody doing an assignment yesterday that I'd never heard of in California, and they're a California company. Where do these guys come from? If you're new at it, hire good counsel. Your president of CRA is Eric Peterson, right? Spencer Fain. Hire good counsel. Don't hire your buddy or your girlfriend and think it's going to work. But in a receivership, make sure your order gives you the ability to do what you need to do so that you don't have to keep going back in and explaining it. And then follow the order. If the court wants an accounting every month, give it an accounting every month. Don't wait to the end. If you have to get the court to approve a sale, get the court to approve a sale. Don't just say, hey, please approve. Here's what we did. Here's how we marketed. Here's how many people signed NDAs. Okay. If you're doing an assignment, I'm going to tell you it's the same thing. Know the law, have good counsel, listen to counsel, and do what's right. You don't want to be the one that makes it harder for everybody else.
And they are out there, and they are occasionally, we've gotten calls from judges or counsel that are in the cases saying, we made a mistake in who we hired. Would you take over?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've gotten those phone calls too. And that's also a tough situation.
Well, you also get the people who will not call you because they know you won't do what they want you to do. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, if I'm a fiduciary, I don't take my instruction from someone. With debtors having leveraged their assets, the secured creditor says, well, you're going to do what I want. Well, if you don't like what I'm doing, then don't agree to the use of cash collateral. Or if you've agreed, withdraw your consent and take your collateral back. Mm-hmm. I think, Eric, that's if there's a pearl of wisdom after seeing cases as recent as the end of August out of Delaware, mm-hmm. That's the pearl. Mm-hmm. Because the process isn't going to go away. Mm-hmm. Receiverships aren't going to go away. Neither are bad practitioners.
Yep, it's very true. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate all your insights and thoughts and sharing what you said, not me, was 50 years of experience.
Oh, you're catching up quickly.
So greatly appreciate it. This has been great to listen in and talk through both of the cases, both in and out of court and ABCs. And so hopefully our listeners will enjoy it as much as I did.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my experience.
Thank you for joining Navigating Receiverships, brought to you by the Commercial Receivers Association. Find more information at commercialreceiver.org and catch every Navigating Receiverships podcast by subscribing through your favorite platform today.